As Spokane's Poet Laureate for the last 2 years, I've had a chance to talk to a lot of people about poetry. And one of the questions I'm always asked is, where do poems come from? And I don't have an answer. I could say, well, I sit down and I write down words until something happens. But I don't think that's what people are really asking, so I don't really have an answer. But what I do have are poems and stories about those poems. This particular poem came from a few years ago when I was asked to a family gathering to read a poem written by my great-great-grandfather, Tom Bell. And this poem was found in his diary from an entry shortly after his wife passed away. So it contains some bleak imagery. Roses torn and faded, beauty fades and roses perish, day by night overshadowed, silent deep, crown leaves scatter, dreams forever fled. And I turned those phrases around in my head, kind of again and again. I just kept thinking of them. And I decided I was going to write a poem as sort of a cross-generational collaboration. And this is what came of it. This poem is called The Crown Leaves Scatter. Wandering in a pine grove, I find an obsolete yellow refrigerator, the kind that it even unplugged can hold a cold, belligerent truth. A one-way door. I try prying it open to know what silent deep it keeps hidden, and the handle comes off in my grip. Inside the rusted metal, ancient bees nest dry as paper, guarding the stilled young they had hoped to keep precious to the wild astonishment of being. The nest falls to the ground like crushed and dried blossoms. It joins the green tinsel of the forest floor, soon to be simplified by fungus and the stomachs of worms. Dreams forever fled, delivering good news about the state of mystery. If only I could make myself porous to those worms' words, I would bend my neck to that silent deep dirt, listen for what they do with our dreams forever fled. Perhaps I'd hear of Tom Bell, my first ancestor to live in this pine grove now called Spangle. Tom Bell, whose poem I am to read at a family gathering in a house bordering this green shroud of festered wonder. A poem that crawled in almost illegible lines across his diary's open face after his wife passed. On the previous page, a list of 21 names captioned memorial cards to send to friends. A poem like the day by night overshadowed by the heavy cowl of those names. The weathered seeds listening to me read beg, it's a good poem, isn't it? For how old it is? Tom, I see you on your knees, turning to these words, these ink scrawls like roses torn and faded. I'd like to think we'd be friends if we had been born in the same century. You are remembered as a good man, and that is nearly all I know. Though age has been callous to rhyme, I pick through these lines, parse through the thicket of our unknowing, into the truth of you, writing for an answer because there is not one. The ink wet and smudging, it comes out, crown leaves scatter, beauty fades and roses perish. I reach my hand to the door. 100 years enter the silent deep. The handle comes off in my grip. It comes out day by night overshadowed, roses torn and faded. I want to know you, and all I have are these words, wet with an absence you found illegible. Bees crawl inside each and every syllable and dry thin as paper. I wonder what is hiding inside, but the state of mystery is a palace too lavish of silent deep. I reach my hand to the door. I can hear your pen scratch against paper. Cousins who are your crown leaves scattered ask if it was a good poem. The door to the silent deep falls into my hands. Today, it is a leaf of paper. If I'm gentle enough, I can feel bees buzzing beneath, soft as a buried pulse. And that's the poem, and this is where I usually run off stage as quickly as possible and hide. But today, I thought it might be appropriate to loop back around to that question we had in the beginning. Where do poems come from? And this poem could present several solutions. You could say poems come from previous poems, or poems come from your experience as a human being. But the poem also comes from trying to relate back to this history and past and all these unknowable truths. And Tom Bell's poem comes from trying to connect to this question of what happens when we lose someone. And these are questions that have no answer, but we can explore them and connect to them more deeply through poetry. Thank you.